Hello, everybody. Welcome to the wrap-up on UPRT Solutions Q&A session. What a great day it has been with all wonderful speakers and great engagement by everybody out there. So this particular session is dedicated really to talking about overall how the event went on the various topics among the speakers that can join me here today in this particular session. And also, if there's any questions on UPRT Solutions from a Q&A standpoint, or we can just talk to them generally, we are going to go ahead and do that. So the intent of this particular session is to have an open discussion. And please, at this point, take your time right now to articulate the questions that you have. When you're ready, you can post them into the chat stream or into the comment section, and we will have a look at those, and we'll try to prioritize them the best we possibly can. But what we're going to do as well is we're going to go ahead and put a link into the chat stream right now that is going to be a link that you can go to if you have any questions, where you could submit them. It'll go to our team here at APS, and we'll make sure that gets to any particular speaker you want to point it to, or on any particular topic you want to address. We'll find a way to reach out to you either electronically or in person to be able to help you with that particular question or need that you have. So thank you for joining the event today, and hopefully you enjoyed all of these sessions, or the sessions that you thought were going to be most valuable to you. The good news about this event is you can go back at any time, and starting right now in any session, they're all immediately available for you to watch. To go back and watch those, take notes, replay them, and we have no intent of taking this event down, so feel free to come back here whenever you want. We're going to continue communicating in the channel to everybody if something comes up or interesting topics. So you've joined an event where it's going to be a continual area where we can communicate. And again, please, even though the event has passed and gone behind us for hours or days or weeks or months, if you do have a question and you're not sure how to find an answer, post it into the comment section or the homepage section of this particular event, and just address it to Aviation Performance Solutions. We'll make sure that we get to it within a few business days. Okay, so let's go ahead. We're going to transition now over to the speakers and participants that can join me here today. And we're going to go ahead and get going on the wrap-up and the Q&A session. And as we wait for questions, we'll just have an open conversation, and then we'll be watching in the chat stream. Okay, let's go ahead and jump over to the team we have here today. All right, guys. Well, good to see a nice crowd joining us here for the discussion afterwards. So, Randy, let me just hand it over to you after I took up everybody's first 3 minutes.
We're glad that you and Brad could join us. I was kind of watching out of the corner of my eye while we had a nice chat here waiting for you. But, you know, the conversation was that I've had with several of our presenters today was just how amazed we were at the global nature of participation. As Philip pointed out to me, we started dropping people off as it started to get too late for their time zones on the other side of the world. But really, really great to see people from such a wide swath. We're hoping that we reached a lot of people that may have learned more about upset prevention and recovery training to mitigate loss of control in flight. I know you and I, BJ, haven't had a chance to really compare notes as we were doing our separate sessions, but I think we had really even more energetic participation that I'd hoped for. It was really a good day.
Great. Thanks, Randy. And I think while we have everybody here, is thank you guys, everybody, so much for taking time to help this event. It was very, very important, and you did a great job. And to Randy's point, there was great engagement. So we already have a question coming in, but why don't we just quickly go around the room here for any kind of final comments? Maybe what we'll do is we wait for questions to come in. What are your thoughts of next steps for people being interested in seeking some type of a UPRT solution, implementation, or perhaps even they're just starting at the discussion today? So why don't we start with you, Brian, if you don't mind?
Well, you know, the United States has this mandated, and so since 2019, we've been required to do the whole list, laundry list, and it's very detailed with all the advisory circulars and whatnot. I would encourage global operators that don't have enhanced UPRT mandated yet, just start taking some small steps to ensure that you're going to get that goal down the line. Start with proper academics. Brad talked about trying to find out that theoretical knowledge gap, what pilots should know, what they really know, closing that gap down. And Adrian or Philip hit it perfectly as well. Whatever training tool supports the training objective is appropriate to use for this. It also makes the most difficult task, which is training your instructors, easier. The smaller blocks of content you start with, the more accurate it's going to be. They'll quickly identify themselves, the ones that have a passion for UPRT delivery. They'll make it be your core instructors, and you start down that road. My guess is with the success that we're seeing with objective data in improving or reducing risk with enhanced UPRT, is the regulators around the world will probably replicate some of what the FAA has done, and we'll see enhanced UPRT being a global standard in the future.
Great, Brian. I take that as a handover to Philip, mentioning his name in that sentence. So, Philip, over to you. Your thoughts.
Yeah, so I'm a little less optimistic still. I do believe that we are starting well. I believe we need to do more with and for the regulators. I don't think they're ready for this in many places. They're still enforcing old-fashioned tick box approaches. And you know, as much as we have a great group, I saw in excess of 250 people. I am still concerned that we're reaching out to the converted, and that we're not necessarily reaching those people in those areas where this is a problem, and they don't even know that they have the problem. So as great as today has been, and the presentations have all been excellent, I am still concerned, and this is the same concern I had with Lockhart, that we're not reaching those organizations and those countries and those regulators that need it worse. And I want to make sure that we continue to reach out directly as much as we can to those places, rather than wait for it to happen organically. The airlines themselves have a task quite often as a part of a global entity, the One World or Sky Team or whatever, that will drive it across as well, which is great. But in the end, we need to take the regulators by the hand and say, this is the best that is available in industry, and don't resist. Work with us towards a better solution, rather than just dig their heels in. So as good as this is and has been, I still think there's a lot of work ahead of us.
Excellent. Now, that's great, Philip. And the good news is that this particular resource today is going to stay online, and we've already seen a 10x increase in Mike Graham's presentation. Over 1,000 people have watched his event already. So this could be a platform by which to get the converted to bring the non-converted over to start the process. So great comments, Philip. Always very on topic as usual. Thank you. Brad, your thoughts?
Well, yeah, I must take my head off to APS for initiating this. It's one way of getting momentum moving through the industry. We've been dealing with our regulator quite a bit to try to get them onto a regulated training program. And it hasn't been too successful, simply because of exactly everything that Philip has said. We need to spend more time trying to get the regulator to understand exactly what is involved in UPRT and the importance of instructor training. I find there's quite a lot lacking there in terms of what is understood, what the requirements are for a successful UPRT program. And then, of course, as Brian said, to take small steps. Anybody wishing to do something as opposed to doing nothing at the moment should just take small steps. And what I would suggest is nominate a person who can drive the program, like I said in my presentation, because they will be the person who then starts going through the manuals, contacts the service providers, the ATOs, to get proper advice, and then feeding that into the system through their pilots or management, etc., to try to get a proper UPRT program going. But I can't overemphasize the importance of proper UPRT, because if you apply UPRT as a box ticking exercise, it can actually be quite dangerous. It has to be done properly.
If I could just offer one thing, BJ, in NICADI, which is kind of the kickoff point for this industry-wide, and kudos to Dr. Sanju Advani, who is our godfather and chairman of ICADI. If you're out there, hello, Sanju. But The FAA was intimately involved in ICATI. So the co-chairman on the technical side was the chief scientist of simulation, Dr. Jeff Schrader, for the FAA. Over 4 years of co-chairing ICATI, and he was the principal author of the ACs. So one of the reasons that might have been more effective in the United States with the regulator is they were intimately involved in the entire development of the UPRT strategy. So that was a real advantage that we have. I understand that other regulators don't have that background, but I would really applaud the FAA for being involved early, working with industry and with operators to come up with the best product possible.
Very good point, Brian. That was well said, and I think that's right on it. Let's go to you, Otter. Then we're going to go down to Cody, because I know Cody has a different perspective, but he is entering into a new market as well when it comes to the Air Force. So, Otter, what are your thoughts?
Well, at the risk of sounding pious or even philosophical, I guess, on this, I think I'd just like to encourage our listeners that if you're in training departments and in charge of training, hold the line. Don't let the budgets. We all have been around long enough to know that training is one of the first to get cut there. And the UPRT is about filling gaps and filling needed training gaps that are not typically addressed with regulatory guidance there. And so we've just got to hold the line and jump up and down and make noise and don't settle for less.
Thank you, Otter. And we have a lot of great questions coming in, but let's go to Cody, then Randy, then over to questions. Cody?
Thank you. So it is an interesting time to look at everything that's on the table right now. Innovations are abound, and I know that the DoD specifically has done a whole lot to find new companies, open up new pathways in the sitter space that allows the next generation of creative thinkers to look at these problems that we've had for sometimes decades and find new innovative ways of approaching them. That's really going to be the only way for us to find a positive solution that impacts and fills the gaps as mentioned. So what I look forward to is everyone that's striving for a forward-thinking technology and trying to be, outside of the box and creative. Please continue to champion those thoughts. It's going to rely upon you and all of us to support each other, so that way we form a cohesive voice, and that's going to make us heard much more and a much more resounding impact to the decision makers.
Thank you, Cody. What a wonderful perspective that is. Thank you so much for that. Okay, Randy, over to you.
I don't know if Cody was reading some of the comments, but one of them that came in was in regards to the discussion that we've had in preaching to the choir and discipleship. And I think that's part of what we have to understand is we all know that the regulators are overworked and undermanned, and we, I think, historically have looked at them to change things. And why won't they catch up? And I think that this is a case where industry is clearly ahead of regulators in our experience, our perspective. And so, I know that others have called for them to work with us. But I think that we cannot rely on others to do this. This is the leading cause of fatalities in every sector of aviation worldwide. That means if you're a professional pilot, you have an obligation to try and seek out this training, to seek out better training, and to try and communicate any of the messages that you've seen from any of our presenters today that will move this forward in the right direction, because that's the history of aviation's development, is constantly striving to make things safer. And this is the biggest obstacle that we have left. So the more of us that fight this together, the more effective we'll be.
Well, Randy, I had one question queued up, but because of the direction it went, I'm going to pull a different one up. So let's put in one from Tyler here. And it's somewhat sort of on topic, is what are some tools that can help to convince management to the value of a pilot group participating in a UPRT course? So great question. Whoever wants to start, go ahead.
Data.
And Philip or Brian actually had data. So if you want to go to Brian, too many heads and boxes here, to Brian's presentation, as BJ said earlier, all of these will be available. He has data in his presentation that shows the reduction that has come since the implementation of UPRT at Alaska Airlines. And on the APS website, you can see a presentation that we did last year with Brian Sims of Delta Airlines, who had very similar data. So I think that's what management is going to respond to, is to say, look, it works. It's not, somebody else has run the experiment. The experiment has been done and it works not just at one airline, but at multiple airlines. And I think that, you know, management has a fiduciary responsibility, but they know that training is cheaper than an accident.
Yeah, and I believe John Cox said it really well in his presentation, which was the very first presentation, and we might have all forgotten about it. But it's an investment; it's not a cost. So we need to make sure that it is seen as such, and that investment is an investment in safety. It is an investment in possibly, preventing that one preventable accident that we're also concerned about. And in the end, we need to make sure that we do right. We also need to make sure that we do it globally, and that was what Lockhart was about. It was supported by the FAA and EASA, who both have integrated in a slightly different way. But in the end, the question is not that we should convince management. Management should be able to find its way itself. We need to make sure that the regulators do not prevent our management, the pilot managers, from doing the right thing because there is nothing in the regulation. I think quite often we're in a restrictive environment where the regulators say, where is that in the regulation? And if not, don't do it. We need to teach more about why we're doing this to the ones above them, because their management is in a difficult position. Because if the CFO of an organization asks, well, what regulation do we comply with, or if the auditor from the regulator requires compliance with the regulation only, that's the situation that they find themselves in. So find your own justification, but in the end, we need to have this as an industry-wide approach.
Excellent. What I'll maybe do, Randy, is ask Carrie to put that link into that Delta Airlines event that talks about data. And I think the names got removed, but Brian is the one with his captain epaulets on. So if you're wondering which one he is on the call today. All right. Wonderful.
Hey, BJ.
Yes, sir. Go ahead.
Yeah, I'll just throw in one additional tool that you can try, Tyler, and that is send a decision maker just to go try it, or an emissary of some kind, just try it. And once you experience it, now you can truly assess what you believe the value will be.
All right. Didn't mean to interrupt. Any other comments from anybody on that one? All right. Let's move on to, I'm going to go to every question that appears. All right. We're going to do extra job to get through all of this. All right. So let's bring this one up. And this one is it possible to offer the airlines a UPRT training program with aerobatic airplanes in order to give pilots the real G's experience, positive and negative? And that is a really big question. So let me just throw it out there. Whoever wants to jump on that one first.
So maybe if I may start. So when I started this effort, it was based on House Regulation 5900, which became Public Law 111-216, about upset prevention, stall prevention, and recovery. After that, Lockhart was formed. But during the initial ARC 208 that we did, we identified very early on to the FAA that you cannot require this to be done only in Part 121. You need to have that entire infrastructure set. The FAA has not required that yet. However, at EASA, there is a prerequisite now for pilots that entering into type rating that they will have an on-airplane experience, which I think is the right way to go. Is there a requirement for pilots that are after that regulation came in effect and that have never done it? No. Does it help them? Absolutely. If you've never experienced G's, by all means, it is kind of opening your eyes to a whole different world that cannot be done in simulation. But in the end, I think looking forward, at least the EASA has taken the step to require the on-airplane training for this, and it is very valuable.
You know, Philip, I remember many years ago you articulated and I think it was during that arc, is that it's not the airline's responsibility to teach grassroots UPRT. They should become prepared with it. And I do think that EASA is going the right direction. Unfortunately, there's probably going to be a couple generations of pilots, those with and those without, because at this point in history, it can be, financially incompatible to be able to send an entire existing airline group of pilots through on-aircraft upset training, both from a cost and a time standpoint. So I think you nailed it on the head that many years ago. All right, anybody else on that?
Just the fact that IATA has looked at this and they see that there is a valuable contribution to at least having a subset of the instructor cadre, the subject matter experts that have that human factors contribution, because then they can be sort of watchdogs as the training is implemented to make sure that it is realistic and that to the extent possible, negative training is eliminated.
Other comments, gentlemen? All right. Let's move on to this next one. It's somewhat related from Chad. Great program. If I wanted to stand up a UPRT program, possibly in affiliation with existing UPRT programs, what do you recommend being the priority focus to get the ball rolling? Maybe we'll start with Brian on this, because I know, Brian, you've helped many airlines in the area of UPRT. Maybe you could start, maybe he's not just talking about airline level, but why don't you start there, Brian, then we can roll it from there.
Well, what I'd say is you don't have to invent the wheel on your own. We've got 10 years of experience and 3 years of experience where it's been mandated in the States. So instead of coming up with your own program, reach out to some experts in the field. There's resources out there. Obviously, there's APS, there's other ATOs. And the U.S. operators, I know Delta, United, Alaska Airlines, we've got some experience doing this. And like I said, we've shared our program to over 30 global airlines and different military operations in our resources in Seattle. We'd be happy to invite any training management team, whether you're an airline or an ATO or a military operator, to come and see our program. And the idea is you don't have to do everything, go 0 to 100, like the regulation required in the United States. But like Brad mentioned earlier, just start the program, build it up over time, and then kind of close the loop. So my strongest recommendation is reach out to resources in industry and get that help. We'd be happy to share it with you.
If I may add, one of the baseline documents that all regulations are based on as well, and it got mentioned kind of on the side a little bit, is ICAO document 10011, the Manual for Upset Prevention and Recovery Training. In that manual, you'll find the setup for any UPRT program, including the low-hanging fruit. Don't look at aerobatic airplanes and full flight simulators. To come back to what I said, don't wait for perfect when there's good enough. You can start with theoretical courses. You can start training your pilots right now, and it doesn't even cost money, and you don't even have to ask your management. You can start with the low-hanging fruit, and the Upset Prevention and Recovery Training Manual published by ICAO is a great start that the regulators will look at and accept, that the operators will look at and accept, and it should be the basis for your program. So rather, and Brian, I appreciate what you're saying, but because you have local differences between the FAA and the EASA, and I don't know where Chad is based, but I wouldn't go to an FAA or an EASA specific operator unless that is your regulatory guideline. I would go to the source document, which is the ICAO document.
Airplane upset prevention recovery training aid as well, revision 2 and 3, another good source, great information that really should be disseminated. That information that's contained in those documents really should be bedrock academics for airlines and corporate flight departments.
And maybe to put a point on it is that we do a lot of analysis of what the most effective platforms and mediums are in overcoming the threat of loss of control. Academics alone, and our best estimation is about a 17% mitigation on its own if you don't do anything else. So you have to start with the foundational knowledge of the theory and a practical understanding of what's involved in upsets. And a big part of it, of course, is awareness and prevention. It's key to it. So, dive into academics certainly is somewhere to start. We were recently doing an analysis of all the different program implementations, and every single one had to start with aerodynamics and academics for sure. Okay, anybody else on that? All right. Okay, we got a long call. I got two, and I can't even pronounce his first name. I apologize. I bet Philip probably can. August, I will say, and this is a long one. And you have two. I picked this one, and I think I'll go ahead and read it so everybody can think about it before we go to the answer. Is the question regarding an audit of the UPRT program? The elements of recovery can be included in the full flight simulator, even using an upset standard scenarios, which are necessary part of the full flight simulator approved UPRT nowadays. But regarding prevention, do you think that the standard LOF is sufficient to prove the prevention skills or to demonstrate prevention skills? Over to whoever wants to start on that.
So if everybody else is quiet, I'll start on that. It's a great question. First of all, it should be integrated. There shouldn't just be a prevention part and a recovery part separate. It should be prevention until prevention is ineffective and recovery is needed. So that's one part. Then the other part is regarding prevention. Everything we do, every training we do, everything we learn, all theoretical knowledge is to stay in the center of the envelope, if you look at it from a commercial air transport perspective. So all training that we do should contribute to prevention. There is, in the manual for upset prevention and recovery, ICAO document, as well as a EASA regulatory documentation, there are some guidelines on what you could contribute. But the second part of the question, weather is one, but not the only one impacting the situation. It could be airplane specific, it could be outside elements, it could be weather. So I don't think, to be brutally honest, I don't think that the standard loft is sufficient to prove the prevention skills as broadly as we would like them to be. It needs to be addressed at a broader level.
And I kind of agree with Philip. In the ICAO document that's been referenced earlier, it makes the distinction between maneuver-based training and scenario-based training and says that maneuver-based training needs to come first. And one of the reasons for that it may not be appreciated by everybody, it's not necessarily intuitive, but some of the things that need to be learned in the upset domain, if prevention doesn't work, are counterintuitive, and they are actually different skills than what we would apply in the normal envelope. And so if we proceed with that and at least make sure that those maneuver-based training skill sets are introduced, then it equips pilots to try and put together some tricky loft scenarios. And Brian shared some really good ones, I thought, that they had with bird strikes, taking out an engine and pitot tube at the same time. But there are others that can create scenarios that would require pilots to identify a escalating event before they get there, but maybe provide them with skills that they would need to recover if they actually were not able to prevent the upset scenario that's being introduced.
Now, I would just add that some of these global conferences that we anticipate holding, hopefully there'll be an annual event, sharing information that are type-specific scenarios that are realistic and that meet training objectives specific to UPRT. That's a real challenge, trying to find a good realistic scenario. So the opportunity to come and have a global conference and talk to other operators and find those specific scenarios are very useful. But I agree that you want to start with solid maneuver space training to build the skill set, the knowledge, and it might take some repetition. And then you qualify that by giving a scenario when it's unexpected to see how the crew would actually perform. We've probably got 6 or 7 years of scenario-based UPRT now, which followed basic maneuver-based training, and just little things like flying into a warm air mass or getting into a wind shear. And now we're seeing our pilots recognizing that much earlier than before and taking appropriate action, which is usually descending into thicker air with greater margins. So again, the data supports that transfer of knowledge does seem to be working.
Yeah, and maybe to add to this, I think one of the greatest mitigations is for the pilots to understand how their airplane behaves in normal situations. One of the simple exercises that is recommended in the manual 10011 is an acceleration and deceleration exercise from minimum speed to maximum speed at 10,000 feet, and then do the same thing at the maximum service envelope of the airplane. And you'll see the difference, not only the difference in the speed that things happen, but also the thrust availability, all these kind of things that make you understand better what your airplane does and doesn't do. Those are the kind of things that we would be looking at as mitigation strategies and as preventive strategies. And you know, flying around the thunderstorm, whatever, if the icing situation is present, that is something of concern, especially for some unprotected airplanes, where they could enter into an inadvertent stall for the simple fact that they do not have the capacity to deal with that additional ice and shape and the weight of the ice. So there are certain benefits of weather phenomenons, but in general, the first thing that you can start with is understand what your airplane does in a normal situation while you're flying it and while you're manually, manning the controls.
Wonderful topic, guys. Anybody else? All right. Let's go down one. Let's go on. I think there's a military question down in here. So let me just get to that. I'm going to bring that up. And so from Johnny Pickett, the U.S. Army does a decent job enough with UPRT introduction, but not good enough with refresher. Any suggestions on the frequency of UPRT refresher training? Now, I know Otter stood up a military location. Maybe we'll start with you, Otter, while everybody else articulates their feedback.
Yeah, you know, I'll tell you, the Army actually has one of the leading edge programs currently in place in Dothan, Alabama for their fixed wing transition program. Currently, any Army aviator that is going to get a fixed wing transition, they'll go through that operation there for 3 months, and they're going to receive an on-aircraft UPRT program in an aerobatic type airplane. It's also going to be integrated with academics and then simulator based for type-specific transfer of skill. And it's an awesome program there. It's been well received, and I think the question here is that right now there's no mandate. There is definitely no mandate on keeping those skills that are developed current, because the skills are definitely perishable. Now we've seen here over our, holy cow, 25 plus years of doing this, that there is a degradation in these skill sets over a period of time. We've got some information on that available if anybody's interested. But in general, we recommend recurrent training annually if possible, certainly no more than 3 years, outside of a 3-year window there. So for frequency of that training, again, it depends on the platform you're in too. There's various platforms, as we've talked about in the summit. There you can sprinkle a little bit, every year. But to actually get probably in on-aircraft training, it's got to be within a 3-year window.
If I may add something, I think sometimes, and maybe too often, and I'll be deliberately excessive in my statement, we are waiting for somebody else to tell us what to do when we know what's right. If you fly an airplane, you can turn off, in a safe situation, you can turn off the automation and fly it manually. That is the best UPRT that you have. So don't wait for others to provide you the training when you have access to the best training tool that there is possibly in the airplane itself. So I'm a little bit disappointed that we're constantly waiting for others to create the training and to identify, well, you should be training every 6 months or whatever. If we do so, then somebody will come after us and say, well, yeah, that should have been 3 months and 17 days or 17 years and 18 days, 4 months. I couldn't care less. When you are responsible for your own safety, then you identify what your best training is. So don't wait for somebody else to do the right thing if you can do it yourself.
And here's a good example of that, Philip, is that we started looking years ago at when our customers were coming back to fly with us. And guess what? It was 2 to 3 years. Occasionally they'd do it annually. but they were doing that based on their own gut instinct. And you add up enough gut instincts, and then you have best practices.
And I think that, on the military, because this is a military question in particular, is, the military arguably goes into more aggressive environments with an expectation to maneuver their airplanes. And so UPRT, especially in the Army, where they don't have the advantage of Air Force or Navy training with their pilots are coming from rotary wing, it's really, really important. So we do see they do come back for recurrent, but it's only a unit at a time. And I find that the instructors generally, though, I think the military has the foresight that the instructors tend to come back on an annual basis, which I think is a very good insight for them as to the perishable nature. Unfortunately, it's not a one and done training session, right? So great.
Great question.
Go ahead.
As you say, great question, Johnny. Thanks for bringing it up, and thanks for your service.
Cody, this is on military. Did you want to add anything here at all from your perspective, maybe with the Air Force?
Sure. So what we're looking at is currently it's examining the different environment that COVID has created with information retention. It has disrupted a lot of what we've been used to for decades, if not centuries in some cases, with procedures. So what we're trying to figure out is, what does that mean for the current era? And then how often does the continuing education or continuing validation of this to make sure that everyone is still on their highest level of information retention, and then where does that drop off occur? So unfortunately, we're still in the middle of the pandemic, and then we haven't been able to get a concise amount of data that will allow us to see how this changes. We can only hope that this will start to become more visible in the next few years as we return to some kind of normalcy. But that's kind of where we're at right now. Is we don't want to make too many decisions. We're taking it as a case-by-case basis, depending upon how often the pilots are active. But we're looking at it to say there's going to be a lot of new data to process, and we're anxiously awaiting that, so then we can start making those important decisions.
Excellent. Anybody else on recurrent training frequency? All right, let's go over to this question. Celso, I believe that one of the fundamental bricks of upset prevention and recovery training is flying properly without automation. How to stimulate companies to implement hand flying policies so that pilots are always practicing it. In many parts of the world, disconnecting the autopilot and auto throttle is really frowned upon.
So if I may start off, this has always been hotly debated. The FAA has identified that manual flight is a significant benefit in the prevention of these situations. However, I've been involved, as my presentation said, the ASA and ICAO. There are regulators that say, well, not so fast. We have a simulator for training on real airplanes. Let's have the highest level of safety. So it is a safety issue. If there is a degradation in safety by hand flying, then it shouldn't be done. Passengers are not test beds, and no normal flight should become a test flight. However, if there is a low workload situation where the crew feels comfortable and has a back-out plan as well, where they can identify, okay, if this and this happens, we'll re-engage the automation and take it back a step, then the actual airplane is a great tool. The other thing you have to understand, speaking a little bit from my background at Boeing, is that a lot of the procedures that are written are based on the use of automation, and many regulators, through nebulous ways, kind of tie their procedures and their audits to how precise you comply with the requirements that the airplane OEM sets, and that includes the SOPs. So when I worked at Boeing and was responsible, we provided a statement of no objection based on some of these requests, because otherwise the regulator would not even allow an operator to hand fly because it was contrary to the Boeing procedures. So the regulators are in a difficult and sometimes different situation as well without the proper knowledge. And they find that if you go against the procedures as published by Airbus, Boeing, Embraer, ATR, and those that I'm forgetting, that it could diminish the safety. So overall, as important as loss of control prevention is, we cannot see it as a vacuum, and we need to make sure that we're not sacrificing other safety issues for the increased awareness of loss control and prevention thereof.
Well, I'm going to disagree.
I didn't think you would.
And there's obviously cultural differences between airlines around the world. So if you're operating a long-haul airline, the opportunity to practice manual skills, that's going to be a little bit different than if you're a short-haul airline. All I can speak to is our experience at our airline. And I will tell you that we haven't had any pushback from Boeing or the regulator, and we've really enhanced and emphasized manual flying opportunities to include turning out the flight directors. And
But
we
that's
run it
because your regulator supports it, and that's exactly my point. Global regulators do not necessarily support it like the FAA has supported it.
Well, Philip, I didn't finish my statement. The way we justify that is we use data to show them the data supports that there's increased capability and safety margins that are created by that. I mean, when you're in a certain emergency that the first memory items are turn off the autopilot and the auto throttles, we don't think a pilot should do that the first time in the real environment without experiencing some real resemblance of that. But just to move on a little bit on that, there's actually quite a bit of cost savings to embracing manual flight. You talk about comparing a visual approach to flying a full IFR arrival procedure, you're talking about a tremendous amount of money over the course of a year. So there are benefits both on the safety side and the operational cost side by having your pilots be skilled in all levels of automation. In fact, that's our emphasis at our airline is you should be fluent in all levels of automation. And if one level automation fails, you step it on down. And the way we construct our recurrent training at our airline is every year they will get a pretty demanding circuit. Well, they have to hand fly the entire takeoff, instrument approach to a low visibility, low ceiling landing without the autopilot, the auto throttles, or the flight director. And what that does is encourage our pilots to hand fly out on the line so they're prepared to demonstrate that skill set. What that does is it unloads simulator time where we don't have to teach instrument flying skills in the simulator. We can emphasize UPRT scenarios as some other part of training. But I do understand and appreciate that many airlines are operating under regulators that make that very, very, very difficult. And I'm very aware of that. I appreciate that. But data is the best way to kind of change that direction.
Sounds like violent agreement to me. Love it. All right, Otter, maybe a perspective from Southwest Airlines, or maybe Brad from your airlines on that, because it's an important topic.
When I got to the airline, I was kind of a knucklehead fighter guy that found himself flying a big old airplane transport category airplane. And man, there was a lot I had to learn about how to fly that airplane and what it was like. And I was very thankful to join an airline that encouraged us junior FOs to hand fly the airplane as much as possible, all the way altitude and back down. And fortunately, had a lot of captains that were willing to let me do that there, and tremendous benefits, I think. So I really can't overstate the importance of maintaining manual flying skills for sure. So,
Brad?
Yeah. Equally from our side, I'm a great proponent of manual flying skills to try and sharpen those up, because the guys are just not flying the airplanes anymore. And to get that to permeate through the airline is quite difficult. Initially, the guys will say that they're very keen to get that policy introduced and to support it. But when you actually look at who's actually doing the flying, or you're sitting in the jump seat and watching a visual approach being flown on an autopilot, then you realize that the message hasn't quite got through. But as the guys had done their UPRT training, and as they'd done their recurrency, and as the years passed, we found that there were more and more guys who were confident enough to fly the airplane manually and to let their co-pilots fly the airplane manually as well. Having said that, I tried to make sure that all our PPC training, all our recurrent training had a substantial amount of manual flying in, more so than what it had before. So if we couldn't get it done online, at least we were getting it done in the simulator.
Excellent. Thanks, Brad. And, you know, what we found is that over the years, it probably took us 15 years to realize it, which is kind of sad in retrospect. But probably the biggest value of upset prevention and recovery training done robustly is the day-to-day value of increased flight envelope awareness, flight envelope or manual flight operations proficiency, and just a better overall decision making. And so there's more benefits to UPRT. Again, depending on how it's implemented, it can be done incorrectly as well to have an opposite effect. Okay, anybody else on this topic? I think we're down to our last question. All right. Let me just, before I say that, let me just scroll down in here. I think everybody is responding to the conversation. So I encourage the speakers to go back on after the event and have a look at those. So this is a bit of a long one, but it's a good one. And I think it circles back to transfer of skill. And let me pick my way through this and read it. So thank you for the excellent seminar. What are your opinions? Is there a possibility for negative transfer in flight? SCP, I'm thinking from a single engine pilot, multi-engine pilot, or plane. Type rating, initial training, CPL ATP is done on a single engine plane, aerobatic plane, and they use an extra 300. Later goal, for example, is the A350. Upset recovery may have some different aspects depending on the type of plane, high speed and altitude automation. Just for example, the effect of the thrust pitch moment. So really summarizes a way to end this conversation here today on the transfer of skill and how very important it is. So why don't we give everybody a chance, an opportunity to check in on this. Whoever would like to start, go ahead.
Well, I know that there's several of our presentations today that have brought up the distinction between aerobatics and UPRT, and this one certainly does that. There is very much of a possibility to introduce negative transfer of skill using different aircraft platforms, and this is what highlights something that has also been mentioned at many of the presentations today, which is the importance of the instructor. The instructor is essentially a translator between the capabilities of the surrogate aircraft, the proxy aircraft that we are using for UPRT training because it provides a margin of safety, and the operational aircraft. So you have to have an instructor that has the skill set, the experience base, to be able to identify those differences. Just because you're using a maneuverable aerobatic aircraft does not mean that the instructor has to let the student roll at a rate that is unrealistic for the transport category aircraft. Just because it has a significant structural margin does not mean that the student should learn how to do recoveries outside of the 2.5 Gs, which is the normal limit load factor for transport category aircraft. So, and that is a bit of a problem in two ways. One, because we don't normally fly airplanes to learn to fly airplanes other than the airplane we're flying, but that is exactly what we were doing in UPRT. If I'm flying an extra 300 and my student is going to be going into a 737 or an A320, then that extra becomes, for the purposes of our flight, an A320 or a 737, which means I'm not going to let them go to full power, which might make sense in recovering from a stall and an extra, but it wouldn't make sense in recovering from a 737 or an A320 in a degraded mode, where that pitch up could actually exacerbate the stall. So that's one of an important aspect, and I'll let others take it from there.
Well, I'm just going to interrupt to say that it is one of the 15 days a year that it's lightning and raining in Arizona outside the window. So we're excited about that. Everybody's jumping around here with excitement. Okay, from that, Randy, great transfer of skill. Let's go to, how about you, Brian? What are your thoughts on this? Make sure everybody has a chance to chat here.
Is that Brian or Brad?
Brian.
I'm going to defer because I've spoken enough, and the on-aircraft training is not my level of expertise. So,
okay. All right. Why don't we go to you, Brad?
Okay, so I couldn't agree more with what Randy has said. You know, a strategy that is taught correctly and the correct strategy taught properly by instructors that have been properly trained is transferable across almost every platform. So, and we've seen that by having guys fly the Airbus, having guys fly the Boeing. That sounded like a gunshot going off, BJ, but it sounded like
lightning. We're excited.
Yeah. And as far as the human factors is concerned, you've got to learn that on aircraft. So if the instructor's trained properly, he should be able to avoid any negative training that could occur from training, say, from an extra 300 to an Airbus 350. Importance
Right,
of the
Philip.
instructor.
Sorry, Brad, you had more there? I think I cut you off.
I was just emphasizing the importance of the instructor.
All right, let's go to Philip, then Otter, then Cody.
Yeah, I think the question has a large EASA background from Samu, and he's absolutely correct. There is a risk. However, I think both Randy and Brad said it correctly. If it is about strategies and the instructor understands the intent of the program, then it shouldn't be airplane specific. In the end, when we wrote the regulatory guidance under EASA with rulemaking task 581, 582, that led to the upset prevention and recovery training that is now in the EU framework. This was something that we considered. However, the benefits outweigh the risks. I remember the first time I came to APS, APS had a mantra that included the use of rudder. And it was one of the first things, and I think I flew with you, Otter. It was one of the first things that I said, that is a negative transfer when we would put people on the rudder of a large transport airplane. So we need to understand what we're training for. We need to understand that we're teaching a strategy. Then at the type rating training, and that's what the EASA regulation also prescribes, and the EU requirements are, is the type-specific characteristic need to be learned. So in the end, there will be a little bit of unlearning and untraining, possibly if those experiences follow up on each other quite closely. But they are both a very important and different aspect of the upset prevention and recovery training. And Brad identified something that I think we're missing sometimes in this whole thing, is the human factors aspect. The human factors aspect of the on-airplane training, where you have a mouthful of ground in your face, but still you need to force to push to unload. But also the communication that is necessary in the whole thing. So we're teaching more than just flying that airplane and recovering that airplane. We're teaching how to communicate, how to deal with startle, how to deal with surprise, how to properly get the airplane back to the center of the envelope, and how to recognize that where we went, it was not something where we ever want to be. I think in the end, if we have this training, starting with single engine piston, then multi-engine piston if necessary, and then type rating, there's something to be learned at every stage. But in the end, it is to make sure that you understand that where you're leaving that nice center dot of the envelope, you should be extra aware and go back as soon as possible. And those first signs of leaving that center of the envelope should be the warning. But in the end, if you do not recognize or you are unable to bring it back to the center, the on-airplane experience that you have, the G-loading, all those kind of things that cannot be replicated in simulators, it is a valuable experience that you always bring back to whatever situation you have. So yes, there is some unlearning, but in the end, the benefit far outweighs the difficulties and the issues.
So I get to do some recurrent training on Philip. I love it. So when you were here, Philip, we had rudder with a stroke through it. It meant do not use rudder. But I'll tell you, though, that one of the reasons why we removed rudder and adopted the industry standard is because that misunderstanding of rudder even being mentioned, even though it was stroked out, is people over the years would think back, well, rudder is part of the strategy, but we were trying to emphasize not to use it. As it turns out, removing it is the best compromise. So, yeah. Otter, over to you, sir.
Yeah, if you caught on to what everybody's saying here, which I pretty much agree here in large degree, that we're talking about the difference between non-type specific UPRT and then type specific. And 90% of the knowledge and skill sets that a pilot needs to have are non-type specific. And it's absolutely important to get type specific training. But we find that still right now, there's a vast majority of pilots who don't even understand the 90% of the type specific that you need to understand, let alone delving into the type specific. So we just see there's definitely an order in which we should go, and ICAO and EASA are trying to address that. There's a stepping stone approach in terms of the knowledge and skill sets that are to be acquired by the pilots in his career progression.
And the one thing I would add, because there is a misperception, people either think it's all non-type specific or type specific, but the reality is, even though 90 to 95% is common and transferable, that 5% that is type specific can be all the difference between surviving and not, depending on the situation. So you can't leave type specific behind. It has to be part of the program. It's critical, especially to Brad and the Airbus, with all of its reversion modes and the fly-by-wire flight envelope protections. It's absolutely critical. So over to you, Cody, for final comments on transfer of skill.
So I want to say that I'm probably the least qualified to directly talk about this, but I'll, from my perspective in dealing with pilots and pilot trainees, what I'm hearing is, and I agree with a lot of what you said, is the difference between procedure and technique. So what we deal with is procedure. It's very specific. We also deal with emergency procedure training. So an upset, it's very similar. What we're looking at is, what is the learning management system? What is the syllabus? Like what are the things that need to be taught for them to pass these tests and get through this training moment? What we also deal with, though, outside of that, is allowing for the program to still have some trainer input for technique, things that you will only learn when you're in the seat, which is what I'm detecting whenever I hear everyone else's feedback is, over the course of a career, you're going to learn some things that aren't going to be in the manual. And it's going to be almost generational, that information transfer, verbal, and then the muscle memory of, okay, this is occurring. This is how you deal with it. Yes, we have this procedure, but now this is outside of standard procedure. What do you actually need to do to get yourself back into a safe space? So I think that can be some negative transfer of that depending upon who is training you. And that's not specific to this industry. That is a universal thing across any trainer-trainee, relationship. So it's really down to how is the management vetting that in management, leadership, MAGCOM, whomever. How are they looking and determining what is being said and what's being transferred down to the next generation of pilots? And then what kind of stops do they have to validate or deny those things from going on to the next generation? Obviously, we know that there can be some negative transfer of bad habits or maybe personal inclinations, but that's part of transparency and communication and making sure that nothing is private and everything is transparent.
Well, Cody, I have to say you've added a lot to the event today with your unique perspective. Thank you for chiming in. Really appreciate it. Well, gentlemen, we're down to the last 2 minutes. Why don't we go 20 seconds or less with final recommendations, words of wisdom. We'll go around the room, then we'll call it a day. Randy, let's start with you.
Pleasure to work with all of you. I hope that today we made the world just a little bit better place.
Awesome. Brian? You're on mute, Brian.
UPRT content will be embedded in normal curricula 10 years from now. Just be part of what we do.
Awesome. Brad?
Yeah, I every time I listen to a panel like this, I learn a lot. And, I've seen a lot of training taking place. And obviously, my emphasis has always been on the importance of the instructor, but it's always great to listen to the perspectives from the industry. I always learn a lot. Thanks to everybody.
Awesome. Great, Brad. Philip?
So first of all, thanks for hosting this APS. I think it's very necessary. And what I've been saying all along is these kind of events identify the need, and it also makes people think about this, and just that thought provoking the presentations and the discussions and stuff like that makes us a little bit safer already, because it's part of the upset prevention that we're doing. So great job, and let's keep it up.
Wonderful. Cody, words of wisdom.
First, as Philip said, thank you very much for hosting this. It's been extraordinarily educational from my perspective. I will now share this with a lot of my peers in the VR, XR training industry, because this is something that I feel like is possibly not on our radar as much as it should be. But again, learned a whole lot, met some great people, and I greatly look forward to seeing where these relationships go. Please reach out at any point in time and know that I can be a tech point of contact for you if necessary.
Excellent. Thank you, Cody, again for being here. Otter, wrap it up for us.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I love being with these industry giants here, talking about this topic that I'm certainly passionate about. And I just salute our audience. I mean, what true professionals to join us here for this and be involved and really want to make a difference.
Great. Thank you. And guys, thank you so much for being here. Your dedication, volunteering your time makes all the difference, and most importantly, bringing your expertise and sharing it so openly with everybody. Much appreciated. And a huge thank you for all the people out there live and the many thousands of people that are going to watch this recording and the other 9 sessions in addition to this one. We're just excited about improving safety and overcoming this threat of loss of control. So with that, take care, everybody, and we will see you next time. Bye-bye.